Green, do you want to activate that mic? Green. Mike, do you want to turn that one on? Okay. So, what do we do?
Charles number 2.
Oh, you did. Okay.
I've already marked my paper.
Okay, so 1, 2.
So Jeff's number 1. You're
I'm just
number
going
2.
after Jack. I'm going after
I'm
perfect.
3.
That makes it easy for me.
I've already marked my paper, JCD. So
Perfect.
Three. Nice to meet you.
Okay, folks, it's 6 p.m., so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Jeff Kraft, for those of you who don't know me, I'm a board member. And what we're going to do here tonight, we got this gentleman from Alice Power, Jason Niven, sitting to my left. And the board will be asking him questions. And so the ground rules for tonight is, unfortunately, what we've done is ahead of time, the LS Transmission Line Committee and the board put out requests for folks to send us questions. So we have about 30 questions between what the town committee has come up with and folks have sent in. So that's, we have about an hour and a half. The meeting is going to start at 6. We'll be done sharply 7:30. And unfortunately, an informational meeting, so the board will be having a discussion with Mr. Niven, so it's not a public, nobody here. We figured it's better to have a meeting than not. So please just remember that questions, capital questions, and formal amendments and questions. I'm going to rotate. I'll ask the first question and then we'll go with Carol. Anybody have any questions before we get started? Okay, hearing none, we'll dive right into it. Mr. Niven, you ready to kick it off?
Sure. Like you said, my name is Jason Niven from Ellis Power. And I'm just happy to be here today to help address any questions and just do it in a very civilized manner and be as informative as I can.
Jump right into it then. Question 1, put the substation located in the corner.
No. The substation that needs to be installed. So there's 3, I call it 2.5 substations that are needed for the project. there needs to be a substation located in Aroostook County for the Long Road Wind Energy Project to connect into. And so that's planned to be placed in Glenwood. There needs to be a substation that interconnects with an existing transmission line, MEPCO transmission line. It goes from Warrington to Albion Road, and it goes across kind of Dixmont, Detroit. And so the substation that's planned for that interconnection is in that range, kind of from the eastern side of Dixmont to kind of the western side of Detroit, somewhere along that line. And then there'll need to be a StatCom station. It's a partial, it'd be a smaller station that needs to be located at the Cooper's Mill substation down in Windsor. So those will be the three interconnection points. So yeah, we have no reason to have a substation in this area, kind of Thorndike Unity.
All right. If you need me to repeat this, please let me know. Besides paying taxes, what impact fees and economic community benefits will LS Power offer directly to host communities?
Yeah. So right now, the largest plan is taxes on the property. They're fairly substantial. We are working on a smaller community benefits package that we look at in terms of how can we help the communities that may be impacted by the line. A few of the areas that we've been focused on are primarily educational based. So what can be done to help promote youth education and career development? The other is, are there programs that we can help support that would help retaining employees in the state and helping the economy? And then looking at how can we help support community-driven efforts, whether they be social, I think that would be a small piece, so little town fairs and that type, and primarily how could some of that be focused to help with kind of charitable activities that would go on in the communities of impact. But by far the largest dollars that would end up flowing into the towns, the plan would be through the tax portion.
Thank you.
Many of the towns this new corridor will pass through have small volunteer fire departments that already struggle to find enough volunteers. What responsibility does LS Power have for not only staff training to handle emergencies, but also in making sure there are enough people to actually do the work?
Yeah, so that is something that has to be worked out before anything would go in service, is working with the local communities to make sure that emergency response is there, that folks are properly trained on how to respond, that there is that availability. Obviously, as the owner of a large, expensive infrastructure assets, we wouldn't want a small incident to turn into a large one that requires a lot of repair. So we have a vested interest to make sure that those are in place. It's not something that there's a plan that's developed today that's ready to go. We haven't even got to the point where we know where the route is. So that hasn't been solved, but it's something that will have to be solved, and we'll work with emergency response with every community to make sure the equipment's available and that the training is there and that this could properly be executed.
Will butters be compensated for loss of the proximity of their property?
Yeah, so as far as compensation, so the compensation becomes a very individual, unique negotiation that's going to have to go on. Once we define a route and start meeting with folks about their individual properties and working to obtain an easement. So it's hard to answer that without knowing the individual circumstances, and everyone will have to be dealt with on a one-off basis. So
Open to working with the individual.
we will work with every individual to negotiate unique easement agreements with every single one. Obviously, we will come forward with an offer and a template agreement I mean, we can't really just start with zero, so somebody's going to have to start an offer, but we know at that point it will then become a negotiation back and forth on what are your concerns if it's a no, what can be done to make this better, what can be done to improve. If it is a value and a compensation that's justified and reasonable, how do we get there and what makes sense? So.
Mine's also on the topic of compensation. Will you compensate for the reduction in value of a parcel, loss of view, smaller parcel size being less valuable, and loss of future use?
So again, that is the intention of essentially that easement payment is to help make people whole. So I think it's similar answer to the first, that it is having those conversations and understanding what that is and that perceived loss and how to compensate for that.
Thank you.
Again, on compensation, do landowners receiving a payment have to pay tax?
I'm not completely sure. I think it may be a taxable event, so I think that's one that would have to be talked with your tax professional and how that's classified and what happens there.
Okay, the next category is land obsolete savings / cost of roofs. Will ratepayers be paying for the transmission line before it is actually energized?
So ratepayers would be paying for the transmission line when it was ready to accept energy. And so that's what was written in the term sheet and intended to be part of the contract, is that when we completed the project and it was ready for service, that's when we would start getting paid on it.
But there's no way at this point for individual landowners or ratepayers, I guess, to know what kind of an increase that's going to be. And the reason I ask that is because I know many folks heavily weighed down by electric bills. It's crazy. So this is just another.
So there's two folds. There is a cost of transmission line, and then there is a cost of the wind energy that will be able to be delivered. And that wind energy is less than the cost of current power that's being paid for. I wish that I personally wish, I won't speak for LS Power, but I personally wish that the pricing for both the wind and the transmission were public at this point. I know some work's been done to estimate what that transmission cost is. Enough's out there that the backwards calculation is not far off, and it's exactly what I would do myself. It's not too hard to take that number then and look at the amount of power that's supposed to be delivered annual and figure that out into a per kilowatt basis. When you look at that and you look at the average cost of when that's developed, it's very competitive pricing. It's a reason why the Daymark study, when it looks forward, estimates that over the life of the contract, there's a savings of $3.3 billion to ratepayers over the life of the contract. So in the end, when we look at this, it's a little bit frustrating to us as outsiders, why there's some pushback on this, because it legitimately makes sense for the ratepayers in terms of savings, and it makes sense from economic development, and it makes sense with the projected energy growth in the state of Maine. And so looking holistically on the state of Maine, the project looks to make a lot of sense on its own merits. That doesn't take away that there's concerns, legitimate concerns from individuals that will be impacted by the line. But if you take a step back, it makes a lot of sense. There isn't one of these things where you go, this is some renewable energy, initiative that's going to then raise rates and it's the super expensive electricity. It's not. It's one that fits in really well with the load growth and intentions of the state in a way that's extremely economic, looking at the all-in price with both the wind and the transmission.
if the transmission lines are obsolete, no longer in use, or decommissioned, will the easement revert to the landowner?
So we don't even have a standard agreement fully drafted, so I'm not sure at the moment what I have is in there. The intention is that that transmission line is an extension of the existing system. And so there's already lines that run from Cooper's Mills up into Warrington or Pittsfield, and Pittsfield all the way up, and those are in service now and would be expected to be in service for generations, as load continues to flow. This isn't one that when the wind goes away, this thing's completely obsolete and will never be used again. I don't think we can speak out 50, 60 years to know exactly, but it's something to look at in there. And I don't know the exact terms at the moment that are in that easement, if and when it goes away.
So that would be something that would have to be looked into once the easements begin to be drafted.
Yeah, I know for sure the easement will want to be a perpetual easement as long as it's, able to be in service. So that'll be one that's there, that it doesn't abruptly end at year 50 and no longer can be used. So it'll definitely need to be in a place where it's perpetual as long as there's a need and a use for it. I'm not sure exactly how it'll be handled for if and when that day ever comes when it needs to be taken out of service.
Thank you.
What happens to the transmission line if the King Pine Wind Project isn't?
Yeah, so these were two separate procurements by the PUC, and I believe it was directed that way if you go in the statutes too, that it was two separate procurements. So it was a request for energy in the county, and then there was a request for transmission to connect it. There's been folks trying to develop energy up there in Aroostook County for, I don't know, decades, at least since 2016, but at least the last decade for sure. And the biggest sticking point is the transmission. There isn't a transmission available to get it here. So it's one of those things where you have a need and you have no way to deliver it. And so this becomes kind of that conduit to finally allow that development to take place. There is a risk. So if we look at it this way, if the PUC contracts King Pine and Ellis Power, they're not going to do one without the other. If they execute them at the same time, and Ellis Power fell apart, there is no King Pine. There's no way for it to go. If Ellis Power moved forward, and if for some reason King Pine didn't get permitted, couldn't go forward, there's a handful of other wind energy projects up there that are just raring to go and kind of fill that spot. Now it would make delays, but there's definitely a need. There's a need up there to have this transmission capacity so that resource can be developed up there.
Next category of questions is under mortgage and home equity impact.
Yep.
And the question is, will mortgage companies need to give consent to the easements that are developed, and what will happen if the lender doesn't give those consents?
Yeah. So I asked about this because we got that somewhere else. There has been, I think it was with an ownership where mortgage kind of came in if the parcel was split. I'm not so sure with an easement. But Ellis Power will definitely work with the landowner to work with their mortgage company to facilitate that. It's something we'd definitely have a vested interest and want to help resolve and solve. So, and
Do you have any experience? I don't know if your company's put up transmission lines like this in the past, but I'm sure this, if you have, then this issue must, a lot of people have property.
yeah, I haven't heard about it being an easement. Like I said, I asked a brief question, and the issue was more with like a splitting of a parcel and a consent that had to be given for the mortgage company, because now it was truly on a smaller piece of property. I don't believe easement has been an issue in the past. So. But yes, the company as a whole has developed 700 miles of transmission line across the country. So Ellis Power is extremely experienced with this process of acquiring easements and building
What will happen when the property value is reduced and homeowners either owe more than the decreased value of the property, or they need to begin paying PMI due to value reduction?
So I think we would have to deal with that if that occurs. We've talked to some appraisers in Maine about the potential impact of transmission line and looked at some of the research. Some of the research that's been done in the past really indicated a decrease in property line or property value if the line was close to structures. So now getting into like 150 foot from structures, did not show a lot in New England if it was farther than that. So our primary intention is to keep as much room between homes and in lines as practical. Very few cases are we having to get within 300 feet of homes. So we're trying to keep that separation, that football field plus of separation between structures and the lines. There was some thought here when he looked through that it may be in the single digits of percentage of property value impact. If that ended up triggering a PMI thing, we'd look at it and work to make sure somebody's made whole on that, right? The intention is not to work with the landowner, then be gracious enough to allow us to use part of their property for this project, and then they get hurt by an increased mortgage cost, right? Or PMI that increases their bills. So it's something that we would work to compensate for.
Regarding HUD financing impact, what is the engineering called? What is the engineer called?
I don't know off the top of my head, so we'll have to get back with you on that one.
And the next category of questions is under environment, water, soil quality. Excuse me. Are there any PFAS chemicals in the materials that you folks will be using to construct the wires, the towels, the cement, et cetera?
Yeah, none that I know of and believe in. So PFAS is something that isn't a concern as far as that we have. So yeah.
That's because you're not aware that any of your construction materials.
Yeah. So the steel and the galvanizing, like that has been that was brought up to MAFCA, and there was no concern there. One of the ones we've been trying to work with MAFCA and get some feedback is in terms of would there be concerns with any of the concretes and stuff, and we haven't been able to have that conversation with MAFCA yet. Yeah.
The next question's in the same vein and
Yep.
more so applies to during the construction process or after construction. What will LS Power do if a well is found to be negatively impacted with PFAS or other contaminants during or after construction? Because as part of construction, things get moved around and things can be turned up. So if a well is found to be negatively impacted from that, what will LS Power do?
Yeah, so PFAS is something that came up during our committee meetings as a major concern, and we've been working with our environmental firms to really start to put together a plan on how we would manage and mitigate and what we should do for pre and post construction testing on nearby water wells. So these type of events could be documented. So as far as what would be done if something was contaminated, we'd obviously work to resolve the situation and redirect, whether that's a new well or whatever that may be. But again, we would work to minimize any impacts. We've looked at how we might mitigate PFAS fields if we had to enter, what's being done as far as trucks and soils going off the property and spread, and is there truck wash on the way out or whatever it may be. So it's those type of things we're looking at. We don't have a plan developed at this point in time and finish, but we are aware of concern, and we definitely don't want to be spreading it out of the fields, and we don't want to impact the aquifers with it. So it's a concern, and we'll work to minimize impact.
Thank you.
How will you protect the water quality of our streams?
So I guess that's a little bit of how would you think the project would impact the water quality of the streams, I guess is really that.
Are you gonna be, following? that?
Yeah, well, yep. So DEP is a big thing. So before we can even start construction, we have to have our permits from Maine Department of Environmental Protection. And so with that, they'll review everything. I mean, we have to submit essentially a full design with access plans. So where we'll be building access roads, where our right of way is, where all our structures will be, where that is with regards to wetlands, calculating what our wetlands impact is, and stream crossings will be one of the big ones they'll look at, you know, and they'll set a lot of limitations for us. Where are we crossing? How close can the structures be? What's being done to manage the riparian buffers? What has to be done to manage the vegetation in that area? So they'll dictate a lot of stuff when it comes to streams. So we'll be putting forth a plan to them when we file for the DEP permits, which is well after our first filing, which would be with the PUC. We have to get through that process. Then we have to fully engineer and design. Then we submit that to them to review. So they'll be heavily in it. They'll help dictate what we're going to have to do when it comes to streams.
Okay, the next category is under farming, crops, and trees. How will landowners who have property in tree growth, in the tree growth program be compensated if the easement disqualifies them from that program?
Yeah, I think this is one where it's 10-acre minimum, right? Is that the question? If we drop it under 10 acres and they were kicked out and then responsible for back taxes and everything else, is that what that is? Yeah, we'd work to make sure the landowner was made whole in that situation. Same thing kind of with the PMI. If our actions are going to cause a negative financial consequence outside of kind of the project to landowners, we'll make sure that they're made whole.
Next question is in the same vein. Who would own the timber that will be cleared in the easements? And if it is LS Power, will they provide the firewood to Waldo County Woodshed, which is a program for that provides wood and materials to people who are in need?
Yep.
And will landowners be compensated for lost timber if that is the case?
Yeah. So up until LS Powers clearing the timber belongs to the landowner, right? So any actions they want to take inside of that easement, any timber they want to harvest, it's up to them, right? It's just that much less we would end up having to clear when it came time to clear the right of ways. When we're clearing the right of ways, we're going to have to dispose of the wood in the way that keeps us compliant with the DEP permits. So there's certain rules on how long that wood can be left on the right of way. And that's really going to dictate us from a logistics standpoint on what we can do with those. Typically, there would not be enough kind of time in that process to really come in and selectively cut, drag off, sell, and actually recoup value for that. So in a lot of ways, the wood will go to waste most likely. A lot of it will be chipped or hauled off and chipped or whatever happens there. In terms of working with wood banks, that was brought up as what a waste to cut all this wood and just chip it and go away with it when there's folks that use it for heat. We get that, we understand, and we want to work to figure out a way how can some of this be used to basically fill some of those wood banks. What can be done to cooperate with them to get this wood off without threatening the ability to clear this right away or putting us in breach of permit and causing us to lose our permit with DEP. So we want to explore that. We've kind of mapped wood banks along the route to get a jump start on who we can contact and work with when the time comes to see what can be done with that. But that's what we do with wood there. In terms of value for the wood, so when we're doing property appraisals, we'll be looking at the value of land in regions and also looking at it by type of use. So is it forested lands? Is it cleared farmland? What is it? So a lot of the value that would be there would include kind of that timber, that's what somebody's being compensated for. There are timber operations that have their value that they put on it. And in that case, we may be talking stumpage value and having to have an appraiser go out and look at what trees would have been sellable and what would those values be and what that may look like to get compensated in some ways.
Thank you.
What about the wind tunnel effect from easement corridors and the effect on field and farms? And how would you compensate farmers and growers for future profit?
Yeah, so this is something that just the concept's even new to us. And so I can't answer that. We'll have to really understand that and what's meant by it.
Okay, the next category is under animals and wildlife. And the first question is, what is LS Power planning to do to mitigate the impacts of EMF and noise?
So I'm not a transmission design expert at all. But in terms of EMF, I don't believe there's a lot that can be done to change what it is coming off the lines. It kind of is based upon the voltage and the current flowing, and it is what it is. And it decays pretty quickly at 60 hertz. So one of the things we will be doing as part of our PUC filing is an EMF study that will look at our planned corridors and the line in it and the expected ampacity and what those EMF levels are at the boundaries of the right of way. Typically, those EMF levels at the boundary of those right of ways are back down to background noise levels. Yeah, so that's what's there. There is spaces where, so I lie when I say there's not a lot that can be done. In the areas where it's installed adjacent to existing transmission lines, like will be done in the north where it's in that corridor, there are ways you can orient the conductors so that when it's interacting with the other transmission lines, they're actually in opposite directions, and you can actually get some cancellation and improvements. So in those areas where that's possible, we'll be looking to make sure we design that to minimize EMF. But in the other areas, it's making sure we have proper spacing and maximizing our spacing from homes so that you just have the natural decay there. Noise, I believe there's some selection you can make with the conductors and the number of conductors that can help mitigate that. I'll have to leave that to the transmission engineers. It is true, like dependent upon the ambient air conditions, kind of changes what it's doing from day to day. There will be some noise study done. The substations are actually the largest producers of noise. And so for our substations, we'll have to do formal noise studies. And for those, we'll be going out early on and getting background noise conditions and doing design, and then at the end, doing post in service noise surveys and make sure we're within limits and expected tolerances. If not, then we'll may have to do something with noise walls around it or something. But the transformers will be the largest buzzing component on this whole project.
Will there be compensation to animal owners for reproduction impacts and as well as dairy production impacts?
So I think it's understanding what that is. I think it's a controversial subject on what that really, what the impact actually would be scientifically. So it's something we can discuss later, but it is a controversial. Some show impacts, others show zero impact. So what is it in reality?
Thank you.
How do you propose to mitigate the impact on bees and other pollinators?
So bees, we got to learn a little bit about, what's swan's honey, right? So we met with Lincoln, who's one of the largest bee farmers, or maybe he's the largest bee farmer in Maine. And he lives in the Albany area. And he really gave us an education on bees and what the concern is. It's one that also is probably a little controversial on whether or not the power lines have an impact or not. Because it could potentially have an impact. He had concerns because he has his bee farm there with, I don't know how many millions of bees that are in that single location before he distributes them around the state. So his concern was if it even had the potential of having an impact, he's really worried because there could be, large loss where he has this large concentration of bees. His other concern is, well, he also admitted it may have zero impact, but the risk to him is pretty challenging because he's in an accepting community that's willing to live with millions and millions of bees and accept that. And for him to relocate his business, if it did have a negative impact, it'd be very difficult for him to find another place. He let us know that his concern in the winter is about a half-mile radius, and during all times, it's about, he said the farthest they forage is about a mile. So we've taken that and we've put some buffers around his call it home base. But the concerns weren't with when they're distributed out around the state and a buffer of anywhere we may place a colony to help support pollination. It was the specific location where I have almost all of my entire colony there at a single location. So we've logged that and we understand his concern and we've taken it on and plan to make sure we work to address that around his, call it home base. But it isn't something that we're taking as a concern all across the state.
Okay, the next category of questions is under compliance. And the first one is, how are you planning to comply with the National Environmental Policy Act and the requirement that if you are using federal funds or a federal permit, you need an environmental assessment, environmental impact statement? And will that assessment be provided to the town?
I'm not sure NEPA is fully applicable to us, but we will have to work with U.S. Army Corps because of wetlands and waterways. And the biggie for us is getting the site location of development permit from Department of Environmental Protection with Maine. So those are two big ones: is the U.S. Army Corps and the DEP permits that we'll have to do. All the studies we have to do for that and all the information we'll provide ends up being public for those permit processes. But yeah, we'll do everything. Original plan with filing our PUC filing in September meant that once we went through that process in September 23, trying to get through that, then through all these environmental permits and then working to get all the municipal permits, we didn't expect to have permits until middle of 2026. So we're expecting almost a 3-year process to just obtain permits. And so there's a lot of work ahead to make sure that we go through all the right processes to make sure we have all the right environmental reviews and permits. I do want to touch on federal funds. At this point in time, there's no federal funds for the project. There are some potential concerns with that because there are some requirements that go with it that can drag in other federal permitting processes. They can drag in other procurement requirements that can really increase the cost of the project. So you have to be careful that the funding that you receive isn't less than the cost of the project that will increase, right? So if you get a $20 million grant that adds $40 million to the project cost, that wasn't a positive, it's actually a negative for ratepayers. So we are looking at those and making sure that if we are able to ever participate in any of these federal programs to receive some money, that it actually is a savings for Maine ratepayers and it isn't adding to the overall cost.
After LS Power applies for the CPCN, if there are newly discovered issues in the route, can the route be changed? And how much change is allowed after submitting the permit application?
So this is our first time going through this process in the state of Maine, so we're not fully sure. What we do know is that We have to submit a route to the Public Utility Commission. If you look at the rules and the statutes, there's some inconsistencies between the two. Some indicates you can submit multiple routes. Other places indicates it can be a single route. Other indicate it could be a corridor that's like a half-a-mile ride. So if it ends up being that corridor that can be a half-mile wide, it kind of gives us an indication that there'd be a couple thousand foot of leeway that things could move left and right, right? In terms of if newly discovered issues are found, when the PUC approves the project and the intended route, it does it with one big asterisk or exception, which is that's dependent upon DEP review. And so if the Department of Environmental Protection comes in and says this route can't go here because of this reason, or it must change to X, or you must add X, those were kind of the exceptions that were in it, and then it has to go back to the Public Utility Commission to make sure those changes can happen. We are unsure of what's the kind of level of minimum impact that basically requires a new CPCN or a new PUC review, right? So if we got into a place and we're trying to work through a town and you got a group of landowners and it turns out, well, these people aren't accepting, but these are, but it's got to shift a mile over this way and it's not, is that a substantial change to a project that's 140 miles long, or is that acceptable in that? So we're not fully versed on that yet, but we'll need to be.
Is the line being designed at future growth?
No.
Okay, the next category is corridor/route questions. And the first question is, which state agencies were involved with the route map?
Directly none. So we did have a meeting / some consultation with Inland Fish and Wildlife to understand their concerns. They're a big, they'll have large input into the DEP permitting process. And so we obviously wanted to understand what would be their expectations and their concerns prior to us determining a route, right? The last thing we want to do is propose a route that can't be permitted. So we want to understand what their expectations are and what their areas of key concern would be. We also work with them to get certain layers and information to understand where the habitats of concern are. So they're the main one that we worked with, but all the mapping was done by LS Power and our consultants.
When will LS Power have a more definitive proposed route map?
To be determined. So our original plan was to do a lot of work looking at constraints across the state in our study area, understanding habitat impacts, mapping structures, trying to come up with some route ideas that we felt were good starting points. And that's what we did and brought forward in July, I guess it was July, to the public, to those public meetings, with the expectation of getting some community feedback. And we've gotten a substantial amount of feedback from those, more than choose A or B, or B with small minor changes, right? So we've been looking at those in ways we can potentially improve the routes or address community concerns that we've gotten so far. Those alternatives can have some substantial differences. Just for example, in Stetson, where we were trying to cross Highway 222, The spot we selected was one of the only areas on the highway where there wasn't a home developed, and there was a nice, well, a gap, let's say, to cross the road and maintain distance from homes. In the last couple of years, a home was built there. You can't see it from the road because it's back in the woods and it wasn't on the aerial imagery. And so that's something we learned during the open houses, is now there's a house there. So the intention is to not route right over the town to the house. So that really took away this opportunity to cross 222. So if we go looking at where's the next place, the houses just happen to be every couple hundred feet there. And you go down, it's a few miles down the road until you can find a next potentially acceptable location to cross 222. So when you do that, it's going to require shifting that whole line miles to the east. It ends up shifting part of it from one town into another town because it has to shift over. And it's going, you know, a chunk of it would potentially shift from Stetson into Levant. When you do that, it's now potentially impacting a whole nother set of landowners that we didn't initially contact, that may not have been paying attention to this project. And so in order to even create the opportunity of getting good feedback, we feel like we would need to take these alternative routes and have a second, smaller set of open houses and outreach than we did the first time. So this would be a little smaller, but to give folks that would be potentially newly impacted, if you want to call it that, if there's folks that hadn't had a chance to consider being impacted in the past, to be able to provide and have the same opportunities as others. And then this other set of alternative routes would be supplemental to the existing. It wouldn't like supersede and cancel out the others, but it just give us some other options and some other opportunities for feedback. And our hope would be, based upon that feedback, we'd be able to then select a route that we would propose for our CPC and our Public Utility Commission application. Doing another round obviously wasn't in the original schedule and takes time. So we had originally planned to file and have that selected route by September, and it's not ready. And so we weren't going to force something that's not ready. At the moment, we would be ready to come forward and have some of those public discussions, but contractually, this project isn't where we need it to be. We've been negotiating with the Public Utility Commission for many months, trying to address some contract concerns and get to a point where we can have a contract for this project. And we're not there. And so at this point in time, LS Power is not willing to publicize more routes and have more open houses and create more public concern over a project that we don't have the confidence that is going to be contracted and move forward. So as of now, some of those development efforts are delayed until we can get more certainty on the contract situation with the state of Maine and the state of Massachusetts. So that's kind of why I say, as far as determining a final route, it's a little bit TBD, because right now it's based upon these contract discussions getting to where they need, where we have confidence, where we'll even continue progressing the project.
I guess that raises a question in my mind. Sounds like what you just said, that there's a chance that this project may not go forward because of the contract issue, PUC.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Clear.
Yep.
Definitely.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done to get this project to go through right. So I think everybody made the assumption that the PUC selected a project, it's a done deal. No, there's so many hurdles. And then the legislator approved a resolve so the project can move forward, it's a done deal. Not even close, right? In the past, that wasn't even a requirement for transmission line projects. There's so many places where the project ultimately stumble. Contracting, especially when you involve Massachusetts, not you, but collectively, you and the state of Maine and the PUC decided that they want to involve another state in this, creates a lot of challenges and complexity on the contract side. So if we can't ever get there, that's a problem. There's still the CPCN, the Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity, the PUC approval that we still have to get through. Even once we get through that, then it's trying to get through all the environmental permitting with the U.S. Army Corps and DEP, and does it ever get there? Only after we get through there, will we have a defined route. So when everybody's like, we want to know where the route is, it won't be final until we can get through that process, which was going to be at least sometime in 2026. That's when we can finally say, here's where we think the route is. With that, all the challenges of land acquisition and working with hundreds of landowners to try and secure easements for route to get from A to B. I mean, there's a number of hurdles before you would ever even start construction, and we're at the beginning.
Why can't a DC line be buried instead of resorting to the DC?
Yeah. Simply it's cost. And so if the state of Maine made a decision that's the route they wanted to go and pass that large significant cost adder on to Maine ratepayers, that's a decision that could be made. So from a technical standpoint, an underground HVDC could be done. It's just, does the state want to pay for it? That's a question for them. Ellis Power, as part of this project, will not be doing an underground HVDC project. That's all there is to it. The costs are substantial. We've done some estimates, and it's nearly 5 times more expensive to do it. At least our estimates of it. And Ellis Power, if they tried to do it under these fixed price contract terms, would lose billions of dollars trying to do it. It's not something we're going to do. It's not an option for this project, but it is an option for the state.
Next question is, how much of a planned route will be placed inside existing corridors, and how much will require additional easements? Realizing based on some of the things you told us, you may not be able to.
Yeah, Tanya can probably answer this better than I can. It's about 1/3, 2/3 split.
Are we rescinding?
Yeah.
Am I going here?
You're fine. 1/3 in it's about 1/3 in existing corridor. It's primarily in the north, and 2/3 new corridor. There's actually a storyboard. If you guys go to the website, on our project details portion, that was developed, and it really goes through the endpoints of the project, the study area we looked at, existing infrastructure in that study area, feedback on what we can and can't use and why, and really sets the stage of where we need new corridor. So in the study area, there's I-95, what do they call them? I lost it, but DOT has accommodation rules. So what they'll allow in terms of utilities to be installed in their right of way. And it doesn't allow for overhead distribution and transmission line. And so we've had conversation with DOT on whether they'd even consider allowing overhead transmission line inside of their right of way. And surprisingly, they listen to us. In other states, it's usually a quick no, and they don't even need to hear the rest of the story. But Maine DOT took the time to have a meeting and listen to our thoughts, and went back, and a week or two later issued a statement saying that they didn't view overhead transmission line located 50 to 60 feet off of the roadway to be compatible use. And it's primarily a safety issue. Well, we don't know what their decision was. In the conversation we had with them, their biggest concern was safety, that 50-foot buffer is what cars can easily go off on when they're going 75, 80 miles an hour down the highway system, and that all of their signs that they put in that buffer area are all breakaway to try and minimize impacts. And obviously these transmission lines would not be breakaway transmission lines. So you have serious risk of injuries if that was to occur. One way to manage that would be to put guardrails, but those would be every 1,000 feet or so, which would basically line the whole thing. There's concerns about guardrails create a hazard, right? By having that close to the roadway, somebody swerves a little bit, you don't just run a tire off into the grass, you're into it. So you have that safety issue, and then there's a cost of maintaining guardrails. So we don't know that's exactly why they said it's not compatible use, but those were some of the concerns they'd expressed to us in our conversation. You can only assume that's some of it. So that's that. So in addition to having I-95 kind of in the study area, you already have existing transmission corridors that conveniently run all the way from where we need to be in Glenwood, all the way down to at Cooper's Mill substation in Windsor. And so it's very easy to say, why don't you just follow one of those? In the northern part, north of Chester, Lincoln area, that transmission corridor has a existing MEPCO 345 line on the east and the Oakfield Wind Farm Gentile line to the west. And they were specifically designed to leave room for a future line right in between them. So in that case, it makes a lot of sense to route a transmission line in the existing corridor, and that's where we propose to do it. When we get to Chester, Lincoln area, there's not a lot of development up there. It's pretty empty. And so to get from there south of the Scatticus River and south a little bit, we propose running adjacent to the highway, so not in highway right away, but next to it. So that's mainly the portion where there's shared corridors in the north. Once you get south of the Scatticus River there really isn't an opportunity to route with existing corridor. The existing transmission line that I was talking about that can run all the way, it's full. So it's cleared and it's full of transmission lines. So there isn't room to physically install another transmission line in there. So that'd require expanding that corridor 150 foot one way or the other. Just between Chester and Bangor, there's on one side of the corridors a dozen, I think it's 14, and on the other is like 26 homes. So between 1 and 2 dozen homes on either side. So if you expanded that corridor just for that shorter segment, that gets about halfway there, you'd have to bulldoze, demolish 1 to 2 dozen homes. The same is true in the south. It's more than that, and it would put hundreds of homes within the 300-foot buffer that we're trying to avoid. And so for those reasons, when we look at those, it's not practical to expand those existing corridors. So from that kind of south of 995 and Scatticus River to Cooper's Mill, we see the need for a new corridor, and that's what we've proposed. So that website has a lot that walks through. Even after that, it shows some of the major constraints: rail trails, rivers, airports, tribal lands, wildlife refuges that are all highlighted that really give us a defined smaller area where we need to route this single new corridor in. And that's where we're trying to figure it out. We've kind of defined this down that there needs to be a corridor from A to B, kind of Cooper's Mill to almost Chester. And it kind of shows a green box or polygon that shows to avoid all these other major constraints. It needs to be in here. And we want to work with folks to figure out what's the best way to route a new transmission corridor inside of these major constraints and minimize the impacts to community and environmental habitats.
Will LS Power return compacted soil to original porosity after construction is complete?
I don't believe the intention is to do so. I think the biggest concern would be through farm fields, correct?
Yes, it would be the land, making sure it's been returned to essentially an original condition that's not just going to go, pure mud runs everywhere.
So in, say, the forested areas that are cleared, we'll be clearing, but we also need vegetation to grow back. So obviously we can't leave it in just mud runs. That won't even be allowable, just because all the issues it would have with waterways and everything else, right? We will promote vegetation growth. We just need lower vegetation growth. So we can't have things probably going up above 10, 12 feet or so and risk growing into the line. So we need vegetation, and we'll work on selective vegetation along the right of way so that it regrows and looks similar to a lot of the MEPCO right of ways or CMP right of ways that you already see. In terms of farm fields, that's actually one of the big concerns about trying to do an underground line in trenches that you physically have to dig up a corridor, and if it was going across a farm field, you have to do it, and you're going back in, it's going to be compacted, and in a lot of cases, none of that ever goes back to what it used to be in terms of farmability because of compaction and nutrients and mixing up and everything else. Kind of the beauty of the overhead is it's going over those fields, so you don't have to do work in those fields. So in terms of, well, let's go back. We can span somewhere on the order of 1,000, 1,200 feet. So in most cases, the farm fields that are crossed, there's nothing that goes in them. We don't have to do work in those fields. We don't even have to enter them. There are some instances where it's a little over that length, and there'll need to be some structures. I think on revised routes that's down to like 6 or 7. So it's a very small cases where you'll have that impact. It will be the impact where we'd have to dig would be for a single foundation for a pole or a structure. So that'll be what's dug up, and then obviously into the structure, you'd have some potential compaction with equipment growing. But again, we'd work with the farmers to deal with what that impact would be and impact future yields and what the financial compensation should be for that.
Do you use helicopters for construction in environmentally sensitive areas to prevent?
So helicopters will be used. They could be used for surveillance in terms of environmental when we're needing to do some surveying. They can be used for stringing and likely will be used for running the wires. And in the case of the structures in the northern section that are ladder structures, they're actually lighter weight. And one of the benefits of those is we can likely fly those in, which will reduce a lot of truck traffic and the need to run those down the roads and through. It'll also minimize some of the size and the impact to potential temporary access roads. So yeah, there's an opportunity to use helicopter for construction, and we'll be looking at that.
How do you plan to mitigate noise and other disturbances during the construction?
I think there'll be, I mean, there just is. Some it's just a fact of what you'll have. A lot of it is the movement of equipment. It is working with towns to make sure that we're compliant with whatever ordinances may be. So if there is ordinances from construction this time to this time, that's what it is. If there's Jake break ordinances or whatever it may be, then we'll work to comply with those, and that we're working with every town and complying with the ordinances and noise ordinances.
How long do you believe active construction will take in the town of Thorndike, given the routing?
It's a little challenging to say in a specific town. So we expect to clear the corridor over winter season. So there's back concerns that limit when we can actually cut trees and clear corridor. And so the intention is to do that over a season. In our original schedule, it was have permits and land acquisition done by the middle of 26. That way we could clear during that winter window. That would put construction for transmission lines starting in the spring. And then the intention was to be in service by the spring of 27 and be in service by the summer of 28. So it was about, if you count with clearing, a little under 2 years. Maybe it's a year and 3/4, whatever that is, 21 months. If you're just counting actual construction of transmission line, it's probably on the order of that 15 to 18 months. in a specific area. How many miles were originally planned in Thorndike? It wasn't very much, one or so. I mean, that's going to be minimal. But I think I would focus on what is the entire construction window and not a specific town at this time, especially since we don't have finalized routes.
Thank you.
How many Maine residents have the skill set needed to work on the project? And how many workers will need to be imported from other states?
I don't know that at this point in time. We're working to develop relationships with main construction contractors. We actually were meeting with AGC earlier today. I believe so, yeah, 8 a.m. this morning. It's been a long day. And so we met with them and met with some of the construction contractors. So we'll closely work with them and labor. One of the things they're excited about on a project of this size is the ability to develop workforce, right? So if there isn't skilled, how do we get local folks on these type projects? It's long enough and big enough that it can train skilled workforce for future projects. So they're excited about it, but I can't give you that direct.
Okay. Are there any houses within the 300-foot required distance from an easement? And is the line also being placed more than 300 feet away from other improvement, like sheds, barns, animal shelters, ponds, etc.?
Yeah, there is, it's possible that some may be inside of that 300 feet. And we'll obviously have to work with landowners and get their effectively their blessing and be able to negotiate an agreement to do that if that's where we go. We're trying to minimize those. Sheds, barn, animal shelter. It's a little tough for us to know. We've obviously looked at aerial imagery. We don't have the rights to enter people's properties and really inspect structures to know what's what. If anything, we've probably been overly conservative, saying that's a structure, that's a structure, that's a structure. So we're probably trying to avoid sheds and barns that may actually be that, and we're trying to stay away from ponds. Haven't considered those improvements. They're not something that we're saying we're trying to maintain a distance from a pond. So, but we have been focused on structures, and we can't exactly tell what's a shed, what's a barn, and what's a home.
When, if at all, will landowners who will be impacted by this project have a chance or say, or have a say or chance to participate?
Yeah, so all landowners in potentially impacted areas have a chance right now. So we've publicized some route options, the ones that we presented in July. We did our best to invite everyone who was either a potentially impacted property owner or an abutting landowner to that to meetings and made it to help educate on that. Obviously, a lot of folks know about it now, all along all in the middle of Maine. So at this point in time, anybody can provide feedback. There's multiple ways to do it. You can provide it to us through multiple channels, either through, we have an online questionnaire. You could print a questionnaire and send it in. You can just email us direct through multiple channels. You can run feedback through towns that have developed relationships with us, town leaders and select boards that have done it. You have landowner groups, folks such as Tanya that have relationships that concerns and questions can be run through and worked through. You have your legislators that you can contact and reach out to. We hear from them about concerns that they're hearing. There's a PUC docket that's really for the procurement. I don't know how valuable it is to really put much in there now because it doesn't really have anything to do with our specific project. But that's a direction too. So there's a lot of channels where folks can do it. If you want to have, let's call it more constructive feedback, it's helpful to get those concerns into us so that we can do something with them. Today, we received well over 1,000 kind of pieces of feedback and information, and every one of them's been database. And if they're associated with a parcel or address, we've geo-referenced them. If we know the town, then it's associated with the town. But we can pull up a map and see where all the comments have come from and what, and then click on them and see what they are. So providing us input is a good thing. This is a time right now where we're working to try and develop a route that will minimize impacts to community environments, towns. And ultimately, we know there is going to be an impact, and it's on us to try and make a route selection that try and balances the different stakeholders' feedback, knowing that we're not going to be able to end up with zero impact and make everyone happy. But we're going to do our best to minimize that impact. And so the more pieces of information we have, the more feedback we have, the better we'll be able to do our job. Even after this process, this is early and upfront, where we're trying to work with folks to get help on the front end to even develop a route. Ultimately, we're going to have to decide on one, and we're going to have to submit it to the Public Utilities Commission. And at that point, there will be a docket open for our particular project, and there'll be the ability for the public to comment in those. There'll be room for interveners to be able to request information and provide comments and feedback. There'll be public hearings and places for folks to give input on the project. There's public hearings once we get into the Army Corps permits, even after that, and the Department of Environmental Protection permits, even after that. And ultimately, we'll have to get municipal permits from every single town. So there's a number of places where the public will be able to participate. I would say the earlier that there's constructive feedback, the more we can do something with it. We can do more with it now than we'll be able to be done with it later. So I would encourage folks to stay engaged and provide productive feedback and help us solve the problem of how do we route something in this kind of constrained area while minimizing impact.
Other than King Power, lands available for proposed transmission line to connect into wind and solar.
So right now, King Pine was the project that was selected to be developed. The transmission line has a rating of 1,200 megawatts. King Pine Wind is 1,000 megawatts. So there's 200 megawatts of capacity on that line. That's 200 megawatts of capacity that main ratepayers will be paying for that is unused. So it's kind of inefficient to leave that there. You're not getting the best bang for your buck. As I mentioned to you, this energy that's going to come from up there is cheaper than what you're paying currently, and the transmission is the cost. If you want to think of those, the benefit was the cost. The transmission is the cost. You want to maximize the benefit of energy. So in the spring, the legislatures passed a bill to require the Public Utility Commission to have another procurement for that 200 megawatts of renewable energy in northern Maine. It would also tie into our Glenwood substation. They'd be responsible for getting it to the substation and tying in. If it ends up being set up like the previous procurement, it was for any renewable energy. It could be wind, it could be solar, it could be biofuels. So they'll have the ability to propose whatever renewable energy they want. But yeah, that should be coming forward to fill that line.
How will the transmission line impact?
I am not, and I'm not familiar with any impacts that we might have, but we can take it back and look at that.
How do you classify your transmission line from a technical description? Is it a transmission line or a generation connection line or something else?
Yeah, it's definitely a transmission line. So it is an extension of ISO New England. So it will be an open access transmission line. We would be a public utility company with the obligation to serve. And that's part of some of the contractual challenges on who interprets it as what, right? Because it has different obligations for one than the other. So yeah, this would be an extension of your existing transmission system. It would be open access like all your other transmission system is. And we would be a utility no different than MEPCO or CMP or Versant with regards to transmission. Obviously, we wouldn't be delivering to folks' homes and we wouldn't be billing directly, but we would be a transmission utility similar to them.
Thank you.
Well, that's all we have for questions, Mr. Niven. I want to thank you for coming tonight. And I would like to say that once you have a solid growth, and I know that may be a couple of years away, it sounds like, maybe we'd like to have you come back again so we can talk more specifics about Thorndike.
Yeah, and I'd expect more before then. Like I told you, there is some alternatives we're looking at. So we expect to have some public meetings to review those. And so there'll be an option. It may not just be Thorndike specific, but there may be something in the area, and we would encourage you guys as a select board to come and attend and meet with us and understand it more. And we just invite all the residents of Thorndike to come and participate that in there. That also when we have those. So I wanted to have them in October, but we're not having them in October. There's a good chance it'll be, if the project move forward, it'll be first quarter of next year.
Thank you, folks, for coming and submitting the questions.